And I was looking for a sponsor all the time. It was never coming. And then I saw on Facebook, when social media became a thing, this Peugeot advert. And I've got a video of this. I think I sent you it, where you've got a screenshot of the page. And it was Peugeot saying, do you want to race at the Nurburgring 24 hours?
Yeah.
And it's at the start of the video that is like, I sent you a link to a YouTube video about like my Peugeot history.
My
Peugeot
like journey, here we go.
That's it. It's the very first scene in this. January 2013. You see a Facebook post pop up. That's the post. Would you like to race for Peugeot in the Nurburgring 24 hours? Click here to enter the 208 GTI racing experience. So I entered that competition, which was televised for Motors TV. That's me in the car alongside a Le Mans winner. And here's the panel of judges as I gave my speech about why I should win in French. I learnt this. It was a lot longer than this. This is just a clip from the end of my speech.
Yeah.
And I had a hunch that getting through to the final of one of these competitions...
Did they ask you to do that in French?
No, not at all. No, so in fact, you should probably pause this because it goes on to what happened next. But it was a multi-round knockout competition. You had to have an international C licence to enter. This wasn't like my Formula 4 thing years before where anyone could enter. This was open to MSA at the time, international C licence holders. I did not have an international C race licence.
Right.
But I emailed MSUK or MSA and said, I've done this racing many years previously, 6 years before. Is there any chance I qualify for an international C? And they said, yes, you basically barely qualify, but we would award you one.
Yeah.
And they sent me like a confirmation. I didn't apply for it or anything, but they sent me a letter that I could show to Peugeot when I went for this competition that they said they'll give me one.
They'll give you one
if I need it.
Yeah.
And so I took that with me in a little plastic folder and I went to the first round, which very fortuitously happened to be at Bedford Autodrome on the West Circuit.
Okay, yeah.
Every instructor entered. And I remember one of the management...
I remember this happening. I remember you hearing about this, yeah.
I won't name the person. They took me aside and said to me, are you sure you want to enter this? Because they're going to make the lap times public and you might look silly. And I was like,
really?
oh no, maybe I shouldn't do it. I still didn't have that much self-confidence back then. And I entered it anyway. It was a single lap shootout on the West Circuit. The UK, there were multiple countries doing it. The UK had the highest entrance by far. We had a maximum of 400. So 400 international C licensed drivers entered.
Yeah.
Former BTCC drivers, British GT drivers, every instructor at Palmer Sport.
Yeah.
And I did my lap. It was all electronically timed, and you weren't allowed to use the curbs. They had cones out on the curbs. If you touched a cone, you were disqualified.
Okay.
And I finished and didn't hear anything for weeks until I got a phone call from a friend at Palmer Sport.
Yeah.
And he said, have you seen the lap times? And I was like, no.
So they didn't publish it straight away, didn't announce it or anything?
No, it wasn't on the day. You had to wait for it. So they had to get through 400 people, like through the day. They had loads of people going through in these 208 road cars, doing one lap each. And the lap times were published and I came second out of 400 by 0.2 of a second.
Right.
And the guy that was first was Nigel Moore, who at the time was a Ginetta driver and had done Formula Palmer Audi and I think was on his way to racing at Le Mans.
At Le Mans, yeah.
He was like way too big to be in this thing in my eyes. The guy that there were 5 people that got through to the international final. One of them was David Pittard, who's gone on to be a Works BMW GT3 driver and now an Aston Martin Works driver. Does like every GT3 race you can imagine. And there were 2 other guys whose names escaped me. I don't know who they were, but they were like national club drivers. We all went to the international final at La Ferté-Gaucher, which is a little track in France. I've never heard of them doing anything other than like driving experiences, like in Ferraris and that kind of thing. And they tested Formula E there once a couple of years ago in the winter, but a little track in northern France. But I heard where the track was, and I didn't see in any of the rules anything that said you couldn't visit the track beforehand. So I went with my granddad in my Volkswagen, in my Skoda Citigo. It wasn't a Volkswagen, my little Skoda Citigo. And we just got on the ferry and drove over there. And I paid to drive a Ferrari for 3 laps, so I'd seen the track before we got to the international final.
Okay.
I just went and did a Billy experience to have driven the track.
Yeah.
And although the Peugeot thing a week later wasn't actually on that version of the track, I'd been there and I'd seen the venue and it was familiar.
Yeah.
And it was important that it wasn't all brand new to me when I got there.
Yeah.
So I went the next week, international final, 1 person from each country gets the place. And we did a series of, as you'd expect, challenges. It was all televised. You've got the video, and you had to do a fitness test. So I knew that would be a thing. They didn't tell us.
Is that playing?
It's all on this video.
In the background, if you like.
In fact, I think it's already happened. This is now the prize. So what you're seeing on the video now is the ultimate prize.
Right. Okay.
But we did a fitness test. I've seen scholarships before. There's a fitness test. We had a judge's interview. I've seen scholarships before. There's a judge's interview. That's the thing that happens. And you had lap time challenges in the, at the time, unreleased Peugeot 208 GTI on various versions of the track. Exactly like at Bedford Autodrome, except this time on a track I didn't know. And again, single lap shootouts. So you go out, do a lap, that was your lap time. And as the day went on, they weeded it down from 5 to 1. So one person got knocked out after each round. And every round I kept staying in. And it got down to lunchtime and Nigel Moore got knocked out. And I was like, it's just me and David Pittard remaining.
Right.
And I'd seen over the shoulder of one of the judges the list of lap times from one of the tracks. And I saw I was in the top 3 and that David was in the top 10, but he wasn't at the front. Right. And I was like, I think I've got this if I do a good interview.
Right.
And that was it, apart from an interview at that point. And miraculously, I expected the judges to be French because it was a French company and it was a competition happening in France and they were all French. And so my little thing that I'd learned, this is 2013, we're sitting here talking in a pub 12 years later.
Yeah.
I can still remember because I bloody learnt it.
Yeah.
It was Peugeot a une histoire fantastique. Je veux partie de son avenir. Les autres pilotes ont eu de nombreuses occasions de le sport automobile, mais c'est ma chance. Je vais travailler très dur pour Peugeot et je vais gagner le vainqueur de Nurburgring pour Peugeot, which translates to Peugeot has a fantastic history, but I want to be part of its future. The other drivers here have had their chances in motorsport, but this is my chance. I'll work very hard for Peugeot and I will win the Nurburgring 24-hour for Peugeot. So that's what that translates as.
Brilliant.
And the judges, as you saw in the video earlier, like smiled, like, what? The English guy speaking French and I don't speak French. I just learnt this particular thing.
Yeah.
And one of my
That's
good
clever,
friends at the time was a Belgian Formula 2 driver called Benjamin Bailey. And he was staying at my house whilst he worked at Palmer Sport, and he helped me learn that little spiel.
Right.
And I got there and the interview happened. I was like, I'm winning this. I'm not losing it now. I'm saying this thing. And then ultimately, and I've got a different video clip, which I won't show you now, but there's a judge, they announced the winner and they go, we keep Bradley. And I was like just stunned, silent. I felt drunk standing up on the stage with the winners from each of the other countries, which turned out to be a GP2 driver from Italy called Giacomo Ricci, Patrick Niederhauser, who is a Swiss Nürburgring expert, Vincent Rademacher, who's a BTCC driver from Belgium, and a couple of other guys, a German guy called Dominic Peitz, who actually ultimately didn't get to do the final because he crashed in the practice races and he couldn't get his license for the Nürburgring 24 hours.
Right.
And a French rally driver called Mathieu Santis. So that was the team for the Nürburgring 24 hours.
Cool,
and
man.
Suddenly, what this video here is showing you is us ultimately driving this prototype Peugeot 208 race car in the Nürburgring 24 hours in 2013. And this was like factory. I remember posting a Facebook message, it'll be in my history, that just said, factory Peugeot driver, job done. That was like my little thing.
No way.
And this was us riding on board in 2013 at Nürburgring 24 hours. Full manufacturer support. We got a 1, 2, 3 in our category in the race. It was the most crazy thing ever. You know, the full suit. I got given a Peugeot 208 GTI road car to use for the duration of this. They told me to drive it to the Nürburgring as many times as I wanted. They'd pay for the fuel. I just could go and practice as much as I wanted on tourist and Farton days. So that's what I did. And then I kept this relationship with Peugeot over the following years.
So you took your road car, just
took the road car,
the
videos are on my YouTube channel. And then I got involved in adverts when they released subsequent Peugeot. So the 308 GTI, we did this advert that you're watching right now. This was at Bruntingthorpe with a horse. There was some kind of horse/horsepower connection.
Right,
I don't know.
right, random.
But then I got to do all these kind of cool things. So yeah, what you're watching here is one of the adverts. They just told me to hoon it round basically and get a bit sideways. And look how young I look. Oh my God. 12 years ago. I've aged a lot in the last couple of years, let alone the last 12 years. And I did other crazy things like this, which is racing a power boat down a lake thing. And there was very, very little safety going on here. I had no helmet, no harnesses. I was doing 130 miles an hour along the side of this bloody lake.
Good effort.
and then having to like nail the brakes at the end. And it was like obviously relatively staged.
Yeah.
But that was some internal Peugeot advert. It wasn't even for national TV. It was just for Peugeot internal.
That's
and
funny.
then in 2016, continuing the relationship, particularly with Peugeot UK, I got to race in the British 24 Hours in the touring car class. And that's what this video here is. We're in the same car we drove a few years before at the Nurburgring 24 Hours. It had been mothballed.
Right.
And now we're out there driving again at a different track. This time a track I knew really well.
Right,
and this time I was the lead driver. I wasn't like the guy learning the Nurburgring as like the apprentice. I was the fastest driver in the team by this point. I'd had another 3 years at Palmer Sport.
Yep.
I'd done a bunch more karting.
Yep.
I was fully confident in my ability at this point. And what you probably can't hear on the video if we're watching it without sound is Rob Bath, who's obviously one of the seniors at Silverstone and a very well-known driver, commentating and giving me massive props and saying Bradley Philpot was a star of the night. In the fastest car on track since the early hours. And hearing that back was like some of the proudest stuff. I was like, I'm just a random guy. And then to finish the whole Peugeot thing, then from 2017 to 2019, well, obviously this video ends at the beginning of 2017. 2017 to 2019, I ended up teaming up with one of my German colleagues from that Peugeot competition.
I have some photos of it, do we?
And you'll see some photos, we'll probably have to backtrack to get to that.
Okay.
It's this orange car here. This was the Peugeot 308 Racing Cup car, converted to TCR spec, racing in the TCR category at the Nurburgring and VLN series. And I raced for 2 full seasons and 1 part season with this independent semi-works Peugeot team that had backing of Peugeot Germany racing this car, which was the best experience of my life. Being in a team that really wanted me there, being quicker than... So that my teammate, to put it into context, has the 3rd most wins at the Nürburgring of all time. His name's Jürgen Nett. German guy, lives in a village nearby, runs a Peugeot dealership, and raced in that original Peugeot competition all those years before. And they decided to... They race all the time as like a family team. And they decided to buy a racing cup car and get in contact with me, and I got to race effectively for free for this entire period. I covered maybe £1,000 in those 3 years of like token expenses to show I was trying. But really I didn't have any backing. I was doing it and they let me do it, and I didn't do any damage. And they needed 3 people. They couldn't get by with 2 because you've got like 6-hour races and that kind of thing. And we did all the season, and we won 2018 and 2019. We won the category. I got by far, I mean, most of my car race wins were at the Nürburgring in Germany. Like by far the most racing I've done is at that track. So I've driven more laps of the Nürburgring than any other circuit.
Really,
And I felt like I really knew what I was doing. I became relatively well known, like signing autographs in the paddock and stuff, like cool stuff. And never getting to race a GT3, despite being very confident that I could have been just as quick, certainly quicker than the gentleman drivers in the GT3s. And I knew enough of the guys who were quite good in GT3. For example, David Pittard, who I'd beaten to the Peugeot drive. I saw him rock up and get pole position in the GT3 class on his first race. And I was like, yes, David, this is like the dream. That then spurred him on to get factory drive and then drive for Aston, all that kind of thing. And he now has his career made. But that made me confident I can do that too. Like, I really wanted to drive a GT3 car. And if anything, they actually look quite easy to drive comparatively because of all the extra grip. I did get to race a GT4 car, which is the picture a couple of slides before this.
Before that,
So this was off the back of a Palmer Sport guest. A wealthy chap whose name was Neil Utley, who was the owner or managing director of Hastings Direct Insurance. I instructed him. He gave me a massive cash tip, which I wasn't allowed to accept, but he forced into my hand. Got chatting to him about wanting to race more at the Nürburgring, and he said, "Oh, I'll sponsor you." And he actually went on to give me small amounts of money, and by small, I mean like £4,000 to £5,000 per year to do with what I wanted to race something over the following few years. And normally it went towards like a helmet or travel to get to the Nürburgring or something like that. But in this year, it paid for me to do one race, the 6 hours at the Nürburgring, in a proper team. This was the Get Speed team, who are one of the very top teams out of the Nürburgring in GT4, with some really good teammates. And I got to do this one-off race, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. We came third in our class. But it was one of the worst experiences because I knew if I did any damage, I'd have to pay a massive damage bill, which I couldn't afford to pay for. And it was the hottest day of the year and my air conditioning broke and I was like physically exhausted. I just wasn't really fit enough to drive that car around in the heat with no fan blowing on me for the whole of my stint. But yeah, we came third. I didn't do any damage, but I was the most relieved I've ever been when I got back to the pits. So yeah, that was that. So
but it's less of an exciting experience than the Peugeot.
The Peugeot was very similar lap times because obviously this is quite a heavy GT4 car. The Peugeot was designed as a race car, super light, better Michelin slicks than we had on this car as well. And although slower on the straights, the Peugeot was actually significantly quicker in the corners than that car was. So lap time, that Porsche was probably 2 seconds quicker, something like that. Right. Mainly because the Dottinger Höhe is a lot faster. You're doing like 170 or whatever in that, and not in the Peugeot.
Yeah, I'm with you. So a couple of slides that just came up was the random picture of you stood next to Sebastian Vettel.
Yes.
And I remember hearing about this too, and I was like, what the fuck? How has that all happened? And then, obviously I've read about it since, but tell us what actually happened that led to that photo happening.
So far, all of the significant stuff I've done is competitions that I then won and then got to do the cool thing. And this was no different. This was, I think Facebook, certainly a social media competition that said something similar to the Peugeot one. Do you want to race at the Race of Champions? I was like, click, like, whatever. And the thing was, you had to produce a video, it was like a 1 minute video, something like that you then had to get people to vote on. And the two drivers with the most votes went through to the final. So a bunch of people made videos. I don't know how mine got near the front initially, but I went on the biggest social media campaign. This is how I got involved in actually being prolific on social media.
I was like, what's Brad up to? Why is he like...
So this is 2015.
This social media stuff.
We're a couple of years further on. We're in between the Peugeot stuff, but a couple of years further on from that original competition. That's why I'm wearing the Peugeot coat still in this. That was my only racing gear. And so I entered the Facebook competition. I managed to get the most votes. I basically just spammed every single forum, website, social media outlet I could to tell people to vote for my video. And my video, which was basically clips of me doing cool stuff, like doing donuts in cars at different tracks that I've been instructing at, or giving a ride in a rally cross buggy at Goodwood when I was working at Goodwood Festival of Speed, doing rides, all cool stuff like that. And some of the Peugeot clips, because obviously I had at least done some more significant racing by this point. And people voted for me, and I got through with like 2% more than the next guy or something. And we then went and had to do a head-to-head shootout at in the Olympic Stadium on the weekend of the Race of Champions.
Is that on one of the videos?
It is, but not one I've sent you. The shootout isn't. All the videos you've got are what happened after I beat the other guys.
It's not the McDoing one. That was
that's part of the same deal. It's all the same weekend.
Yeah.
But the skills challenge is the thing I actually won entry to. So the skills challenge was the thing they were doing at London, where you had to effectively set a lap time in an aerial atom around a course. And all the F1 drivers did, all the drivers competing in Race of Champions did this thing. And your prize for winning Rock Factor, it was called, was to get to be in that, just to get to compete against the F1 drivers in that thing.
Yeah.
And I beat, in the head-to-head shootout, I beat the other champ. His name was Des Foley. He was a Formula V driver from Ireland.
Yeah.
So he had to sit and watch whilst I got to actually do the racing. He got tickets to watch the racing, but he was there in the stadium.
So it's an aerial atom, but it's essentially, it's like a glorified auto test thing, isn't it? It's just like an elongated
which very convenient.
Which you were so in the zone for
pretty similar to the Caterham Pursuit at Palmer Sport.
Yeah, that you'd spent week in, week out,
and pretty similar to the aerial atoms I've been instructing in at Palmer Sport on a normal track.
Oh right, so you've been in the
so I've been in atoms
as well,
and I'd driven auto test courses and done you do so many days of random instructing work where you drive cool stuff in that random places. So I was quite well set to do this, and I was also quite good at judging enough risk without actually mucking up. And one of the things on this was you weren't allowed to touch a cone. So you got a 5-second penalty if you clipped anything. So I was quite good at judging how hard I could push, confident in my car control. And if you've got the video, feel free to play it, but you'll see the result of the skills challenge. You might have to skip to the actual bit where it happened, because this is me describing what it was.
It's a great video. It's how I beat F1 drivers at the Race of Champions. It's on Brad's YouTube channel. Brad Philpot.
And so what you're seeing is it being announced that I've beaten Des and saying, wow, this is so cool. I can't believe I'm getting to do this. And then this is David Coulthard and the other drivers waking up at the Shard. I was staying in the travel lodge near the with my car getting towed. The Travelodge. In fact, there you can see my car being towed away because I parked in a place apparently I wasn't allowed to park. So I had to deal with that separately, whilst everyone else was swanning it, living up at the Shard. And then I put some examples of F1 drivers cocking up the course. That's Jolyon Palmer stalling his aerial atom and generally not being very good and nearly crashing. Susie Wolff nearly hitting the wall.
Yeah.
And after they'd all gone and Vettel had done his run, this is Nico Hulkenberg having his go. He was pretty good. Almost doing an all right donut there, but not particularly great. And eventually, who's this? Felipe Massa? He was near the top. Drove it a bit too much like a track rather than auto test. Wasn't really sideways enough. Vettel was the guy to beat because he won the Race of Champions a couple of times. And he was just good at everything. And the only driver that was doing a track walk in the mornings, because I watched him do it, and whilst I was doing it, and no one else did it. So me and Vettel were the only guys that actually went and looked at the track. So then I went last because I was like not the star of the show. Like they wanted all the F1 drivers to do their stuff. And then Crofty, Sky Sports F1 Crofty, who I'd also instructed multiple times at Palmer Sport by this point. So he knew who I was, which was nice, giving me a bit of a big up on the microphone. Then I went and got to do my go. And you see it now. I guess we can probably let it run because it's not very long being an auto test. I didn't hit anything. I actually got used to using a handbrake and an aerial atom, as you can see here. I've never done that before. A little hydraulic fly-off handbrake. These were the particularly important not to clip cones here, and then you had a bit of a stop box. And I think some lights came on for a certain amount of time. This was, I guess, so that you could do a bit of a burnout away from some lights and get enough wheel spin that you could turn the corner but not cock it up. A couple more handbrake turns, and then you're into a bit of a donut. And this was, you can kind of see it's like patchy damp. It wasn't like it was bone dry. You see there's puddles around the place. So quite difficult to judge. But I sent it into my donut quite cautiously, but like very tidy. Final handbrake turn into the final corner. And I knew it was good. And you can see that because I'm going number one, like with my neon yellow gloves. I knew it was a good run. And but I didn't know how good. I got a bit of a cheer from the crowd, a bit of a partisan crowd. I was watching my replays on the big screen, basically what you can see here, a bit of a slow-mo replay of the donut. I was like, that's cool, that can go on socials. Be quite pleased with that. And then they announced the times and the winners, and I was at the top of the board. And I'd beaten Vettel by 0.5 of a second. And and it wasn't like I beat everyone because they got penalties. It was only Andy Prio that got a 5-second penalty anyway, and he wouldn't have been quick enough without it. So that was it. And then I got to go up on the podium, get this mega trophy, which is in the video behind me there. It's still my best trophy. And I was like, just obviously completely in awe. Another moment where I'm like, how did I find myself here?
How did I find myself there? Still on the podium with loads of F1
completely
boys.
Bizarre. And obviously Vettel had no idea who I was. And this is Jason Plato very kindly saying I was the most impressive young driver at the Race of Champions.
Driver.
At this point, I definitely was in my 30s? No. How old would I have been? I can't even remember. 2015, I would have just been turning 30, so 29 at this point. And then it goes on to show like the rest of this video just saying, I did these other cool things, but this was the coolest.
It's a great story, man. It's a great story. It's like when we...